Thank you, Charles, for inviting me. I want to first shortly introduce a little bit what we are doing. I'm working at the ZKM, it's the Center of Art and Media Technology, and it's probably one or the biggest center of art and newest technology, where we kind of research what artists could do with the most advanced technology. And in this institution, I founded around 8 years ago the Expanded 3D Digital Cinema Laboratory. It started mainly, we tried to use what the use for 3D could be for the future, and we created a new alliance between technology, art, and science. And I think this is a very important combination, because technology in science or technology in art is quite normal, but it's very specific that we want to have a combination between technology, art, and science. And what Scott was pointing out, we started always what we called content-driven technology. We start from the story and then try to find out what kind of technology could represent this kind of story the best. So we did a lot of workshop in 3D and VR, and we set up recently a new EU program for the European Union, which was called Future Design, Designing the Futures. And we have a lot of international partners. And Beijing Film Academy is one of our recently new partners, so we have now a network all over the world. And it's not only kind of academic institution, it's also, for example, Disney Research or Fraunhofer, where we do kind of a research together with those institutions. And since 6 years, we have the Beyond Festival, where we kind of every second year, we have a big exposition for the audience, and a symposium. Every year we have a symposium like this for kind of getting experts together and sharing their knowledge. So we do a lot of research. We did a lot of underwater 3D research, 3D film, 360-degree panorama film. This is, for example, was a 3D opera where the kind of the music of Peter Weibel was transformed immediately into 3D visuals. We worked with TV, gaming, and sound. We do a lot of research in what I think will be the next upcoming for 3D, auto-stereoscopic and multi-view. We also work with video conferencing. With the University of Edinburgh, we work on 3D laser scanning. This is the Roseline Chapel in Scotland, and they could, in 1 or 2 days, they could scan a complete building, and it's exact by the millimeter. They do it for cultural heritage. But we could use those information also for animation films. Imagine you can kind of scan Beijing, and then you can populate them, and you don't have to create all the backgrounds. We do a lot of scientific data visualization. We work with new user interface, interacting with data. When we come to VR, we will see that interacting with data is one of the most exciting things with this new technology. And we do a lot of research into what we call VR learning. I think there's a huge opportunity in using VR for simulation. There is already, for example, when you want to fly a rocket or an airplane, you go and you make first a simulation, because it's probably too expensive to crash 10 airplanes before you know how to fly them. But with the cheap possibility of the democratization of price in VR nowadays, if you want to make a driver's license, if you want to learn how to ride a bicycle, you can simulate that all. So when you want to kind of be an engineer and repair a machine, you can simulate this in the computer before you destroy a lot of things. So I think this will be a real game changer in education. And we work a lot in immersive environments. So we try to bring immersive environments to the home. So when we come to virtual reality, and sometimes I find it really weird that this term by Lanier in the 79, where said I do virtual reality, I think one of the huge opportunity of VR is also virtual fantasy. We could not only kind of recreate existing worlds, we could kind of create new worlds, where you kind of live in worlds which are not similar to what we experience here on our planet. So virtual VR could be a window to the world or a portal into the self. And the portal into the self, it also has a lot of opportunity and a huge amount of danger because of the plasticity of the human mind. Scientifically, we more or less are now able to prove that we have no center of a self, that we have a unit of identification, and there is a huge potential for deep behavioral manipulation. when you know this kind of trick. You set the VR glasses, you take your hand, the Googles, you take your hand, and you see some virtual hands, and I put some lighter under your virtual hand, and in your brain explode pain. So we have because we don't know virtuality, our body reacts. We saw yesterday the things when people fall down, our body reacts immediately to what we are, completely with sweating, with heart pressure, but also our psychological system reacts to VR because, for example, when my wife wakes up and she's really angry at me, I said, don't worry, it's just a dream. Yeah, because we know dreams, but we know not VR. You cannot say this experience was only VR. They made some experience where you kind of found yourself in an avatar which was half the size or double the size of yourself. And people who had double the size of their avatar themselves, even that they knew that they were in a test situation, showed months later different behavior. Yeah? So our psychological mind has not yet something to distinguish a virtual experience to a real experience. So this is quite important. Probably our kids in the future, they could distinguish that, but at the moment our system is not prepared for that. So the eye of the needle, of course, is how we use VR. If it really has a chance for therapy, for experiences, but do we use it for first game shooters? Do we use it for porn? Do we use it for torture shell? Or do we use it like an empathy machine? So it comes to VR in storytelling. What kind of stories do we tell when we have no point of reference to distinguish it from reality? And what we find out is, even when we started to work on drama structures of 3D, that we have to have a paradigm shift from time constructs to space-time narratives and to story architecture. This is, for example, a 4-act model we constructed for 3D films, where we kind of use the three different stress things, the three different conflicts in a story to kind of give them a meaningful connections towards space. So we took this kind of thinking now more to VR, where it comes to more what I call a participatory storytelling. One of the most thing in VR is that we don't have not only to construct story, but story worlds. So I think things like the worlds of Eduardo Galeano or the worlds of Tolkien, they have all those possibilities to kind of advance into different kind of side layers of the story, because they created a whole new world. And we have to go more thinking in what I call epic storytelling. Dramatic storytelling is because something happens, something else is happening. A real dramatic story is kind of just cause and effect. Epic storytelling is and then something is happening. It doesn't have to be immediately related by cause and effect, but just another thing is happening. So we will see that this combination of because of dramaturgic story functions and epic storytelling moments could be combined to quite a nice experience. And yesterday when we talked about gaming structures, there is something to learn out of gaming structure. I call it the system of story function, bottlenecks, and vegetables. Story functions are situations your audience need to know to understand the next level, to understand the next act. Whenever you don't know those different relationships or this information, you cannot make sense out of the next story act. So when you can move around in those possibilities, you have to pick all the story functions before you can go through the bottleneck into the next story level or the next act. It doesn't matter if it goes like 1, 2, 3 or 3, 4, 1, but you have to collect all this information that the story makes sense. And then you can go to the bottlenecks and go to the next level or the next act. But every cool gamer knows exactly what we are trying to do. Yeah? So what we do is we throw in this act a lot of vegetables. Vegetables are epic story moments which are nice, funny, but they are not important. They don't lead to nothing. So you have a huge variety of story function which you need, and vegetables which you don't need. And people ask me sometimes why I call it vegetable. I'm a meat eater. Vegetables on my plate are nice, but I don't need them. Yeah, so this is the story function you don't need. So you can construct highly complex situation where you still can produce them because you can calculate them, which are not completely going from cause to effect, but getting into structures like this. If you have too much opportunities, you cannot finance the experience or the story anymore. Yeah, but you can by this still control how many content you have to create for this experience. So what is quite important, and I stressed it in the beginning when we talked about the 3D 4-act drama structure, is in every serious drama we have 3 levels of conflict, or let's say 3 levels of stress. We have an outer plot conflict, and a relationship conflict, and a character conflict. What is really interesting when we go to space-time narratives is that the whole history of dramatic thinking and teaching is just by how we organize time. In America you say film is life without the boring parts. Yeah? How we create suspense in time. But when we go to space-time, and we started to go to space-time narratives with 3D, yeah, we kind of find out that we have 4 tensions, which we can work on. And this is a complete new field where we as academics can do research. We have not only the temporal tension, and how to create temporal tension, how you create suspense, how you create stories. There we have, since Aristotle, a whole developed theory about it. But nobody ever had created a theory about a horizontal tension. What could be a horizontal tension? In the old Greek time, they said we have 2 main motivations. One we still accept is eros, but eros doesn't mean what we call it now, erotic or sex. Eros in the old Greek time meant all the wanna-have things, all the greed-driven things. What you want to have, the desires where you want to have something. It could be a person, but it could also be a car or food or whatever. Or everything which is what is a wanna-have motivation, a greed-driven motivation, is a horizontal tension. Why? Because we move, whenever we want something, we have to move horizontally towards it. Yeah? But we have still another tension. We have a vertical tension, and this is the tension in the epsilon axis. And even there, nowadays we forgot that, even there in the old Greek time they had a name for this. It was called not eros, it was called thymos. And it was not sitting in the heart, in their time it was sitting in the lungs. A thymotic tension is, I think, best explained by Achilles, when in Homer's drama epics, Achilles was called by Menelaus to join him to Troy. Achilles despised Menelaus, he hated his king. And he went home to his mother, who was a seer, and asked his mother, should I go into the Troy war? And his mother said, if you stay home, you will have a lot of wives, a lot of children, all the gold you want to have one of the richest kingdom in the world. If you go to Troy, you die. But in thousands of years, people will still sing songs about you. And he took his sword, he went to Troy. What kind of erotic motivation is that? If we go to morals, if we go to religion, if we go to art, we have a lot of thymotic motivation. If we would not have thymotic motivation, it would be stupid to become an artist. So, and the 4th dimension is what we normally call the point of view, even in 3D film, the parallax tension we use, how close you are to your protagonist, how close you are to the story, how far you are sitting in the unknown with your story. Yeah. So we can, with the parallax tension, we can control the point of view of the audience, which is quite interesting when we come to VR, because normally we are in the story and we need a motivation why we are in the story. Yeah. So we could use this kind of space, and normally if you, for example, look at 3D films, 99% of the 3D films use the space as a metaphor for space, which is obvious. But we could use the space as a metaphor for our emotional relationship. Because in our language, whenever we talk about relationship, we talk about space. We said we're getting closer together in our relationship, and an abyss is building up. There is a gap between us. We use space as a metaphor for relationship. So we could use it in art, and we can use space also as a metaphor in the relation of the consciousness and the subconscious, which would make 3D films and VR much more interesting than they are today. So the first thing is we need a paradigm change. All what we learned in our old times in film school, or it was kind of framing the world, getting a three-dimensional world into a two-dimensional picture. But even with 3D, we have to think in stages, and in VR, we have to think in spheres. The next thing is spatial coordinates. They need emotional significance. For example, when you saw Casablanca, in this time, you see the red spot. Yeah? There was a theory that the most concentration on the screen will be in the red spot, so they tried at Ingmar Bergman, the object of desire was always on this place on the screen. Yeah, it was very important that the object of desire is on the place of desire, which brought him into a real big problem when they had this backlash to Paris, because Humphrey Bogart, of course, Rick has to drive the car, but then Ilsa would sit not in the sweet spot. So they solved the problem by bringing a British car to France. Yeah, so the man could still drive and the woman was still sitting in the sweet spot. But they were discussing really exactly what even on a flat screen, what part of the screen would kind of create what kind of meaning. And when we go to 3D or when we go to VR, space needs intellectual, emotional, and aesthetical significance. We need definitely a new timing. When you stand in front of this picture, The Garden of Delight, and you watched it for 8 hours, you can come home, you go home to the hotel and you go back to the museum the next day because you have not seen it all. So whenever we create worlds with a lot of texture, give the audience time to really explore it. For example, when I saw the jungles and the creatures in Avatar, I wanted sometimes to stop the action in the film just to look at those marvelous creatures and plants. So give them time. We will have a lot of problems. We had it already in 3D with the titles. Where are the titles? In VR, it will be much difficult. We need floating titles reacting towards the audience. And in VR, we have a phenomenon directors never came across. I call it an Electron Observer. That means we don't know where our audience looks at. Even in 3D, we had complete control with our knowledge on filmmaking where our audience are looking at. We know how to do that. But in VR, you know, the Electron Observer, we can never measure in quantum physics where an electron is. We know it's there, but we cannot measure. So we don't know really where is our audience looking, and we need, of course, sound, movement. We have a couple of things to control, more or less, the viewpoint of our audience. But the really interesting thing is we have to explain why our audience is in the story. There needs to be a motivation to create this kind of point of view. And you know the film Lady in the Lake was an early film where the camera is always in the protagonist. And so we experience the film as looking through we are the detective and we are trying to find something out, but we are always in the first point of view. We don't see the protagonist, we are the protagonist. It failed completely. The film is stupid. It's boring. But it's at least it's a start to see what we could do if our audience is in the first point of view involved in the story. We kind of started in the last time to develop a couple of strategy who could be VR strategies, and I always, when I think about new art forms, I start with very, very old art forms. So what I found, the first VR experience I found in history are in old monasteries, Christian monasteries, the cloisters. The cloisters are interesting because you walk through those buildings, and once in a while you meet a sculpture or a picture which is kind of showing one moment of the life of Christ. For example, it's crucifixion. Yeah? And this is an artist's expression of suffering, for example. Yeah? But when you go through these cloisters, because you know already the story, you fill in the gap of the different experiences, because it's a known story, you fill in the rest of the story in your mind. Well, the emotional experience is when you meet the art, when you meet those sculptures or those paintings, but you fill up in your mind the story. So this is one thing when we go to VR, it's more space-time experiences than space-time narratives. We have to find a way to create different experiences which in a row, combined, lead to something like a personal story. Another strategy, I looked a lot through old films who have something to do with what we could do in VR, is I call it a porthole strategy. You know, Being John Malkovich? In Being John Malkovich, you kind of go through a porthole into the mind of John Malkovich, and you look through the eyes of John Malkovich, and you are John Malkovich. So for example, one of those porthole strategy is that you enter in VR a first point of view, but you don't know who you are. You could be a man, you could be a woman, you could be black, you could be white. And by seeing how the world reacts to you, you have to first figure out who you are. And by figuring out who you are, you can enter other portholes, so other point of views. And by entering a couple of point of views, you can solve a riddle or a crime or whatever. Yeah, but it would be a real interesting structure, because when I was young, I was thinking, if I ever could look through the eyes of another person in the world, that should be the illumination. Yeah, because we are so kind of shut in our own perception, that changing the perception, changing empathy, trying to be a woman for an experience, trying to be whatever, yeah, an animal for an experience, could create a huge amount of empathy. And I think this porthole strategy could be a real nice kind of strategy for using VR. Another strategy is, I call it a game over restart strategy. Like in Run, Lola, Run. When I show, for example, Run, Lola, Run to my father, he said, this is stupid. If you crash with your car against a tree, it's done, you're dead. There is no restart. But for now, young generation, game over restart story function perfect because they know gaming. Yeah, you start the game, the dinosaurs comes, the dinosaurs kill you, game over, you restart, now you know there's a dinosaur in the story. Yeah, so game over restart stories could be of quite an amount of interesting possibilities to create such kind of stories where you start in and you find yourself around, and then you learn a little bit more about the world, and then you kind of start again, and with this knowledge you can go further and further. And this is also a strategy which is used quite often in games. And what yesterday one speaker said, when 3D was a little bit marrying architecture and sculpture to filmmaking, VR is kind of a marriage, or kind of a new remix combination of gaming and filmmaking in its best. Another possibility is sliding doors. You know the film Sliding Doors? This is kind of it tells a story. If this protagonist goes to this one door or the other door, her life completely changes. So we can kind of set up different opportunities of experience how sometimes random moments in your life can define your destiny. And this is really a weird thing, because we always believe, and we try to believe, in cause and effect. We tell our children, if you learn hard and work hard, you will make a career. But then a stupid accident happens, and there is unearned misery and unearned fortune in the world. It exists. It's not, yeah. So in kind of those moments, we can confront ourselves with the randomness of fate. Yeah, which is a nice an experiment to do. Yeah, it prepares you quite nicely for life. So what I already said is we have to think about space-time experiences when we go through VR, and the combination of different space-time experiences with each other will make up new kind of story models. Because what we saw up to now with VR, you go like, ooh, hell, I'm falling down, yeah? So you have one wow effect, one spectacle, yeah? But to have a couple of combined different experience after themselves could start to create a complete new visual language, which is what we need. When we see the beginning of filmmaking, we were shooting scenes, and then what made the new art of film was to invent the montage. yeah, is how kind of we remix different visual experiences. And now we have to invent a new language which kind of remixed and how we combine different space-time experiences. And I'm working on that, and it sounds a little bit weird. It is a little bit weird. I call it curved events, a quantum theory of drama, because I found something very exciting. I researched my dreams, and I found out that in dreams there are rules. They are different to the normal Newtonsian experience in your life, but there are rules. It's not anything goes in dreams. Yeah? And I was suspecting that our daily perception of the world is more or less ruled by Newton's physics, but our nightly experiences are ruled by quantum physics. Because the main things that you can morph, that you can be in different places at the same time, this is also possible in quantum physics. So maybe there is something like a quantum physics combination towards our dream world, which could help to start a way of thinking for VR experience, because VR experience will have some dream-like qualities. Because, for example, when we cut in a film from a total to a person's eyes, yeah, it's quite normal for our daily experience, because when we move, we make the whole way with our eyes, but in our brain we take out the look between here and here. So cutting is very close to our normal perception of life. But to go from one complete sphere to another is not experienced normally in our life. If I now have a VR experience here and then I'm in the place of the Heavenly Freedom or something like that, it goes like, yeah, Harry Potter could do that. Yeah. But in our daily life it doesn't exist, so we have to find a motivation how to come from one sphere into the other. So we need something, a new visual language, and I call it should be something between Eisenstein and Einstein. Yeah? A theory of imagery and a theory of space-time. The last really big thing I started was called the Future Design Symposium, where we kind of invite people from all over the world in all kind of different departments, researchers from stem cells to nanophysics, to kind of make a serious speculation on future developments and not only think about what we do when we compute simulation of what we do now into the future. I give you a nice example why this came all about. We did 3D visualization on simulation of climate. And what we found out is if we compute our data from today into the future, the only outcome could be we ruin our planet 2060, 2070, 2080 or later. Because there is not a variable thing to change. If we take our time nowadays, the population of today, our greed of the day, and just compute it into the future, there will be no other outcome than we ruin this planet. So I said we should kind of not only compute probabilities, we should kind of compute desirable unprobabilities, and that led to something which I called future design thinking. And future design thinking, and this is, I think, one of our greatest tasks for future storytelling. Future design thinking is imagine, try to find your friends, try to find professionals from all over the world and make a serious speculation of a desirable future. And then count it down to the present. Not take only the present and count it down to the future. Think future and then count it down to the present. And we can even compute that with supercomputers. We can simulate those visions of tomorrow or 2050. And then tell the supercomputer, this is the data set we want to be. And now the computer will combine it with the data we are now. And then we can at least discuss ways how we can kind of move towards these desirable unprobabilities of different futures. And that could be very, very scientific, but this is where artists come in. I strongly believe that the thing which makes us human is that we are story-driven animals. Our universe exists more out of stories than of atoms. And I call this kind intersubjective phenomenons. The morning we wake up, we believe in the most unbelievable things. We believe in stories. And what we call religion, what we call culture, what we call nations are stories. And they are stories which so many people believe in it that it becomes an intersubjective reality. And even our economy, which people kind of try to think that is a serious science, economy is a story. The moment we don't believe that this dollar is more worth than the paper on, the moment we don't believe in the dollar anymore, the dollar will lose immediately its value. And this is, look at the world. The moment people stop to believe in the future of America, the dollar will be worth nothing. The moment the world starts to believe in the renminbi will be the strongest thing, then your money will go up. It's a story. It's a story of different beliefs. So we are storytellers. You know this picture here on the left side? It's from 1873. It's Jules Verne at a journey to the moon. You see the rocket from 1873? It looks like the Apollo, with the different parts which sprang up and the capsule which lands on the moon. Just when you look at the capsule, it has a steam engine in 1873. It didn't have a steam engine when they really landed on the moon. Now, there are only two possibilities. One is, Jules Verne could look into the future. Possible. Or, thousands of young people on this planet read this book over more than 100 years. And they had those images already in mind. And new technologies came, and some of them became engineers, and then some of them became astronauts. But the image is already there. So when they found new energy sources, new metals to create things, they created something which was already story-driven in their mind. What does it mean for us as storytellers? That gets really interesting. Our ideas and narratives could create a history of tomorrow. And this is not only cool, this is an amazing responsibility for young talents who want to tell stories to future generations. So, artists will not only create new designs and new film and new technology, but what we have to do is to create a new narrative for the futures, or new narratives for desirable futures, where we create probabilities and desirable improbabilities beyond the imitation of life as we know it. The most creative thing is to think something, to dream something, to tell something not a human had ever told before. Which is normally not creation out of nothing. Normally it's creation, creativity is combining things which had never been combined before. Combining cultures, combining thoughts in your brain. Combining new things is creating. One last thing. I don't really like to be in London, but whenever I'm in London, I enjoy the tube. Because whenever you are in one of those subways, and the train comes in, a voice says, "Mind the gap, mind the gap, mind the gap." And it reminds me what art is all about. Art is working the gap. And when we talk about more immersive environments, 360-degree VR, I just recommend Mind the Gap. When we stand in front of an art piece, like Michelangelo or the Mona Lisa, we fill in the gap between the art piece and ourselves, parts of our feelings, of our thoughts, about our history. So we fill ourselves into the gap between what the artist created for us and ourselves. And this is where the moment of art works. The relationship between the audience towards the art piece, the gap, is the main idea of art. And when you sit in the cinema and here is the screen, and you sit here, yeah, you work your emotion, your personal story into the gap towards the screen. When we go 360 VR, 3D, 4K, 120 frame rates, yeah, some people in Hollywood believe that it's cool to get you completely immersed. To get you completely immersed is making your audience stupid. The moment you immerse on one side heavier than the other, you have to be very clear where is the gap. Where can the individual of your audience put themselves in relationship to the art you have created? So this is the end of my lecture, and thanks again that you made it able that I could come over here.